My mother didn't even wait for me to take off my black coat after the funeral. She stood in my living room, holding a glass of white wine she had poured herself without asking, and set a legal clipboard on the coffee table. "Amanda, honey, we need to handle the paperwork before the bank locks everything down," she said, her voice smooth and devoid of any real grief. "David's $600,000 life insurance policy is going to pay out next week. Since you don't have children and your corporate engineering job pays you more than enough, your father and I decided that money should go toward paying off your brother Kevin's business debts. Kevin is trying to start a family, and he needs a clean slate. It's what David would have wanted." I stood by the door, the scent of funeral lilies still clinging to my clothes. My husband David had passed away in a tragic car accident just 6 days prior. We had been married for 8 beautiful years, building a life based on mutual respect, hard work, and meticulous planning. Yet, before the earth on his grave was even dry, my biological family had already calculated how to extract his death benefit to rescue my 32-year-old gambler brother from his self-inflicted financial ruin. I am a chief structural engineer for major high-rise developments. My daily life involves analyzing stress loads, calculating precise margins of safety, and making critical decisions where a single millimeter of error can cause an entire tower to collapse. I do not panic under pressure, and I do not let emotional weight distort my analytical thinking. I looked at my mother, then at my father, who was sitting comfortably on my sofa, scrolling through his phone, and finally at Kevin, who was leaning against my kitchen counter with an entitled smirk on his face. "David's policy has a designated beneficiary," I said, my voice dangerously calm, keeping my hands steady inside my coat pockets. My father didn't look up from his phone. "Amanda, don't be difficult. You've always been the strong one, the independent one. You don't need $600,000 sitting in a bank account. Kevin owes some very dangerous people money for his real estate venture, and if we don't clear his name, your mother and I will have to mortgage our own house to save him. You're part of this family. You have a moral obligation to help your brother." The sheer weight of their hypocrisy was staggering, but unfortunately, it was a pattern I had endured my entire life. I was the eldest child, the invisible pillar of strength who was expected to sacrifice everything while Kevin was showered with unearned praise and endless financial bailouts. When we were younger, my parents raided my college savings fund, money I had earned working 90 hours a week at a local diner, to buy Kevin a luxury sports car for his 18th birthday. I had to take out massive student loans and work night shifts just to survive engineering school. When Kevin launched a series of failed businesses, from an upscale lounge to a boutique gym, my parents quietly drained their own retirement funds to keep him afloat. And when those funds ran dry, they turned their eyes toward me. Over the past 5 years, I had foolishly given them over $80,000 for medical emergencies, only to discover through social media that the money had actually funded Kevin's lavish trips to Las Vegas and his designer wardrobe. They didn't see me as a grieving widow, they saw me as a corporate gold mine. "I am not signing anything today," I said, walking past them toward my study. "Please leave my house. I need to rest." Kevin stepped in front of me, blocking the hallway, his smirk fading into an angry scowl. "Listen to me, Amanda. You're being incredibly selfish. David is gone. Keeping that money won't bring him back. If you don't give us the funds, Mom and Dad are going to lose their home. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to destroy this family just because you're greedy?" I looked up into my younger brother's eyes. He had never worked a hard day in his life, yet he possessed the unshakable confidence of a man who believed the world owed him a living. "Step aside, Kevin," I whispered. My voice had a cold, metallic edge that made him hesitate. He slowly backed away, muttering under his breath. My mother gathered her clipboard, tossing her head back in disgust. "Fine, Amanda. We'll leave you to your grief. But remember this. If anything happens to your brother's future, it is entirely your fault. We will see you on Monday." Once the front door clicked shut, the silence of the empty house enveloped me, and the tears finally came. I wept for David, for the future we had planned, and for the sheer cruelty of the people who shared my DNA. But by midnight, the tears stopped, and my professional conditioning took over. When a structural foundation shows signs of severe cracking, you don't ignore it. You reinforce it or demolish it. I walked into David's home office and opened his personal filing cabinet. David was a meticulous corporate compliance auditor. He kept records of everything, every receipt, every tax document, and every piece of correspondence. As I dug through his recent digital files and physical folders, I stumbled upon a locked USB drive hidden inside an old watch box. The password was the date of our first anniversary. When the files loaded onto my screen, my breath caught in my throat. David hadn't just been managing his own finances. For the past 6 months, he had been quietly investigating a series of anomalies regarding my parents' financial accounts, and what he discovered was a bomb waiting to detonate. The documents on the encrypted drive revealed a horrific truth. My father and Kevin hadn't just been asking me for money. They had committed systematic identity theft. 6 months ago, while David and I were hosting a family dinner, Kevin had slipped into our office and photographed my personal identification documents, my social security number, and my corporate credentials. Using that stolen information, Kevin and my father had opened a fraudulent offshore business account under my name, using it as a shield to funnel over $350,000 of illegal high-interest loans from unregulated private lenders. They had forged my signature on corporate guarantee forms, effectively making me legally liable for Kevin's massive gambling debts. If Kevin defaulted, the creditors wouldn't go after him or my parents. They would come after me, my property, and my corporate engineering license. David had discovered this trail just weeks before his accident and was preparing to confront them with a team of forensic attorneys. He had kept it from me because he wanted to build an airtight case to protect me from any legal fallout. My hands shook as I scrolled through the forged contracts. My own father had willingly sacrificed my entire career, my freedom, and my financial stability to protect his golden child from the consequences of his illegal gambling habits. They had set me up to be the ultimate fall person. The $600,000 life insurance policy wasn't just a luxury they wanted. It was their desperate exit strategy. They knew that if I didn't pay off the fraudulent loans using David's insurance money, the entire illegal structure would collapse, and they would all face severe federal prison time. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the photos of David on my desk. They thought my grief would make me weak, malleable, and easy to terrorize. They forgot that I don't just build bridges. I know exactly how to burn them when the structural integrity is compromised beyond repair. I closed the laptop, placed the USB drive into my pocket, and formulated a plan of absolute tactical destruction. The next morning I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the insurance company's corporate legal counsel. Because I was a senior engineer with high security clearance, I had access to top-tier corporate attorneys. I explained the situation, provided the evidence of identity theft, and requested an immediate restructuring of the payout method. The second call was to a local nonprofit organization called the David Vance Foundation for Underprivileged Youth, a charity my husband had secretly supported for years. I spoke directly to the director, an elderly gentleman named Thomas, who wept when I told him my intentions. I drafted a legally binding irrevocable trust assignment. Instead of the $600,000 being deposited into my personal bank account, where my father's fraudulent creditors could attempt to freeze it via the forged corporate guarantees, I signed the entire policy benefit over to the charity as an absolute donation. By law, once an irrevocable assignment is signed, the funds no longer belong to me or my estate. It was completely out of reach. I had legally given away a fortune to a stranger, leaving myself with exactly $0 of insurance money. On Monday afternoon, my parents and Kevin arrived at my office building. They walked through the glass doors of my engineering firm with an air of arrogant triumph, expecting me to hand over the executed signature pages. I had arranged for them to meet me in the main executive boardroom, a large room with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the city. When they entered, they found me sitting at the head of the mahogany table, completely alone, with a single thin document folder in front of me. "Well, Amanda, I'm glad you're showing some corporate maturity," my father said, adjusting his suit jacket as he sat down. "Let's get this settled so Kevin can clear his accounts by the end of the business day." Kevin smiled, pulling out a chair next to me. "Yes, sis. No hard feelings, right? It's just business. Once the 600 grand clears, we can go back to being a normal family." I looked at him, his face twisted into an expression of unearned victory, and I felt nothing but absolute disgust. "You're right, Kevin. It is just business," I said, sliding the folder toward him. Kevin eagerly snatched it open, expecting to see the insurance release form. Instead, his smile completely vanished as his eyes fell upon a copy of the irrevocable charity assignment, bearing the official state seal and the signature of the insurance company's vice president. "What the hell is this?" Kevin stammered, his voice rising in panic. "This isn't the transfer form. This says the money was sent to a foundation." My mother snatched the paper from his hands, her eyes scanning the text before her face turned a bright, furious red. "Amanda, what have you done? You gave David's money away to a charity? Are you insane? That was $600,000. Our money. Your brother's life is on the line." My father stood up, slamming his hand on the table. "You ungrateful little brat. How dare you give away family assets to strangers? Undo this immediately. Call the bank and cancel it." I remained seated, leaning back comfortably in my executive chair. "I can't undo it, Dad," I said, my voice steady, echoing clearly in the vast room. "It is an irrevocable assignment. The money belongs to the foundation now. It has already been transferred. There is nothing left for you to take." Kevin gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "You don't understand, Amanda. If that money doesn't clear my debts by tonight, those private lenders are going to sue. They're going to look into the corporate accounts." I stood up slowly, smoothing down my blazer, looking at my family with cold, calculating detachment. "I know exactly what those lenders will do, Kevin. And I know exactly what you and Dad did 6 months ago." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a stack of financial printouts from David's secure drive, and scattered them across the mahogany table. My father's breath hitched as he recognized the fraudulent offshore account statements bearing my forged signature. The room went dead silent. The arrogant confidence they had walked in with evaporated in an instant, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. "You thought you could use my name as a shield for your crimes," I said, stepping closer to my father. "You thought you could steal my identity, forge my signature, and make me liable for $350,000 of illegal debt. David found out before he died. He tracked every single IP address, every bank routing number, and every communication between you and those lenders." My mother began to tremble, looking at her husband for answers. "Richard, what is she talking about? What did you do?" My father couldn't speak. His eyes were wide with panic. "I didn't just give the insurance money away to protect it from your creditors," I continued, my voice sharp as a razor. "I did it to strip away your final escape route. You have no money to pay off those fraudulent loans, which means the lenders have already flagrantly breached their compliance laws." "Amanda, please," Kevin whimpered, his tough guy persona completely collapsing as tears filled his eyes. "We're your family. We did it because we were desperate. If the lenders go to court, the police will look into the signatures. We'll go to jail. You have to help us. You have money in your personal savings." I looked at my brother, the boy who had spent his entire life destroying everything around him while I rebuilt it. "My personal savings are completely safe, Kevin, because my attorneys have already filed a formal affidavit of systemic identity theft with the Federal Banking Commission. Your fraudulent accounts have been flagged as criminal enterprises." At that exact moment, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom opened. 2 plainclothes federal investigators stepped inside, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. My attorney walked in behind them, holding a legal brief. "Richard Vance and Kevin Vance?" the lead investigator asked, looking at my father and brother. My father collapsed back into his chair, covering his face with his hands, while Kevin let out a desperate sob. "You are under arrest for federal bank fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny," the officer stated, stepping forward with handcuffs. My mother let out a high-pitched scream, throwing herself over Kevin. "No, you can't take him. It was a mistake. Amanda, tell them to stop. Call your lawyers. Save your brother." I stood by the glass window, watching completely unmoved as the officers pulled Kevin away from my mother, clicking the steel cuffs around his wrists. They did the same to my father, who looked at me with a mixture of hatred and absolute defeat. "You ruined us, Amanda," my father hissed as he was led toward the door. "You destroyed your own family." I looked him dead in the eye one last time. "You destroyed this family the moment you decided my life was worth less than Kevin's debts. I am simply clearing the debris." As the police led them out of the executive suite in front of my entire corporate staff, my mother collapsed onto the floor, weeping hysterically, realizing that their golden child's immunity had finally expired. The fallout was swift and total. The news of the federal arrests hit our tight-knit community within 24 hours. My mother called me dozens of times, leaving frantic, screaming voicemails alternating between begging for bail money and cursing my name. I blocked her number permanently. I retained a top-tier criminal defense watchdog attorney to ensure that under no circumstances would any plea deal allow my father or brother to avoid maximum sentencing. Because the identity theft evidence compiled by David was so flawless, the federal prosecutors had an airtight case. Kevin's fraudulent creditors, realizing they had been swindled by a bankrupt gambler using a forged corporate guarantee, quickly turned over all their internal text messages and records to save themselves, further incriminating my father and brother. The house my parents lived in was seized by the state to pay off the massive legal fines and restitution costs, leaving my mother with absolutely nothing. She was forced to move into a tiny rundown studio apartment on the outskirts of the state, living off a minimal Social Security check. 6 months later, the federal court handed down its final verdict. My father was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy and bank fraud, while Kevin received 12 years due to his prior history of illegal financial activities and grand larceny. On the day of the sentencing, I sat in the back row of the courtroom, wearing a sharp gray suit, looking calm and composed. Neither of them looked back at me as they were led away to begin their sentences. They had spent their entire lives operating under the assumption that family ties meant unconditional immunity from bad behavior, but they had finally run into a wall of absolute structural justice. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, feeling a profound sense of closure. David's legacy had been preserved, my financial stability was completely intact, and the toxic foundation that had drained my energy for 36 years had been permanently dismantled. I had lost a biological family of thieves, but in return, I had gained my absolute freedom, proving that no matter how much weight they tried to throw onto my life, my structure would never break. Following the conclusion of the trial, I decided to take a 1-month sabbatical from my engineering firm. I needed time to completely process the monumental changes in my life. I packed a single suitcase and drove out to a quiet coastal town where David and I used to spend our summers. Sitting on the deck of a rented cabin, watching the waves crash against the shore, I finally found the peace that had been stolen from me during those chaotic months. I spent my days reading, walking along the beach, and reflecting on the journey. I realized that for the first time in my 36 years, I didn't owe anyone an explanation, a loan, or a sacrifice. My brother was behind bars where he could no longer gamble away other people's lives. My father was facing the reality of his criminal choices, and my mother was finally learning what it meant to live without a financial safety net. The silence was no longer heavy with grief. It was light with the promise of a completely clean slate. 2 weeks into my stay at the coast, I received a formal letter from the David Vance Foundation for Underprivileged Youth. The director, Thomas, invited me to the grand opening of a brand new educational facility they had built using the $600,000 life insurance donation. I drove back to the city for the ceremony. When I arrived, I was stunned to see a beautiful modern 3-story building, equipped with state-of-the-art computer labs, architectural design studios, and engineering workshops for children from low-income families. Over the main entrance, cut into polished stainless steel letters, was the name, the David Vance Memorial Engineering Academy. Standing there, watching dozens of bright-eyed kids eagerly running through the doors with backpacks, a deep warmth filled my chest. If I had given that money to Kevin, it would have been completely gone within a week at a high-stakes blackjack table. Instead, it was now transforming thousands of lives, providing a real foundation for the next generation of builders. Thomas walked up beside me, handing me a small golden key. "This is for you, Amanda," he said softly, his eyes crinkling with deep gratitude. "You didn't just save our foundation. You gave these children a future they never thought possible. Your husband would be incredibly proud of the choice you made." I took the key, holding it tightly in my palm. "Thank you, Thomas," I replied, my voice steady but filled with deep emotion. David always believed that a solid foundation is the most important part of any structure. This is exactly where his hard work belongs. I spent the rest of the afternoon touring the facility, talking to the young students who were eager to learn about structural engineering. For the first time since David's passing, I smiled a genuine radiant smile. My biological family had tried to turn his death into a sordid, illegal payday, but I had successfully turned it into a lasting monument of hope and education. When I returned to work after my sabbatical, my firm promoted me to managing partner of international development. My career skyrocketed, completely unburdened by the constant text messages demanding money or the sudden emergencies that used to drain my focus. My colleagues noticed the change. I carried myself with an even greater level of authority and peace. One evening, as I was packing up my office, my mother appeared at the building's security desk, begging to see me. The security guard called my office, his voice hesitant. "Ms. Vance, there is a woman down here claiming to be your mother. She is demanding to come up." I looked out at the city skyline, my expression remaining completely neutral. "Please tell her that I am unavailable, and if she refuses to leave the premises, execute standard trespass protocols," I said calmly before hanging up the phone. I didn't feel anger and I didn't feel malice. I simply viewed her as a structurally unsound element that had no place in my newly reinforced life. A year later, I received a formal notice from the state prison system regarding my father's request for an early medical parole hearing. He had submitted a list of family members willing to house him upon release, and my name was at the top of the list. His attorney had attached a handwritten note from my father, filled with shaky script, claiming he was a changed man, that his health was failing in the facility, and that he regretted ever hurting his eldest daughter. I read the letter sitting at my kitchen counter, drinking a cup of premium black coffee. I pulled out my laptop, typed a formal single-sentence response to the parole board. As the victim of the federal identity theft committed by the inmate, I strongly object to any early release, as he remains a significant threat to my personal security. I attached the certified court transcripts from the trial, printed the document, and mailed it out within 10 minutes. I knew some people might view my actions as cold, but as an engineer, I know that once steel is fatigued beyond its structural limit, you can never trust it to hold weight again. Kevin tried to contact me as well, sending a letter through a fellow inmate's legal counsel, attempting to guilt-trip me into funding an appeal for his 12-year sentence. He wrote about how horrible the conditions were, how much weight he had lost, and how his fiancée had abandoned him the day after his arrest. He begged me to remember the times we played together as children in the backyard. I folded the letter neatly, walked over to my fireplace, and tossed it into the flames, watching the paper turn to black ash within seconds. The boy I played with in the backyard had died a long time ago, replaced by a reckless, criminal parasite who would have happily watched me sit in a prison cell for his debts. I had spent decades paying for his mistakes, but that contract had been permanently cancelled. The fire cast a warm glow across my living room, highlighting the clean, minimalist lines of the home David and I had built together. A home that was now completely secure. With the final remnants of my past completely addressed, I decided to establish a permanent scholarship fund through the David Vance Memorial Engineering Academy. Every year, the top 3 graduating students from the academy would receive full corporate sponsorships to attend the top engineering universities in the country, completely funded by my personal investments and senior partner bonuses. I wanted to ensure that no brilliant, hardworking young girl would ever have to work 90 hours a week at a diner to pay for her education the way I did. At the inaugural scholarship gala, I stood on the stage, looking out at a room filled with brilliant young minds, corporate donors, and community leaders. As I delivered my keynote speech on the importance of integrity in structural design, I looked at the empty seat in the front row, where I had placed a single white rose in honor of David. I knew his spirit was there, celebrating the ultimate victory of truth over deception. My mother eventually stopped trying to contact me. She realized that the quiet, compliant daughter she had spent decades manipulating was gone forever, replaced by an elite professional who held all the cards. I occasionally heard updates through distant family acquaintances, how she complained to anyone who would listen about her heartless, wealthy daughter, who left her family to rot while donating a fortune to strangers. But her words no longer carried any weight. The community knew the truth of the federal trial, and her bitter complaints only served to alienate her further from the few friends she had left. She had chosen to worship a golden calf of greed and entitlement, And now she had to live in the desert of her own making. I had fully divested myself from their toxic assets, liquidating every single emotional tie until my personal balance sheet was perfectly clear. Now, as I sit in my spacious office on the 50th floor of the newest skyscraper I designed, I look out over the vast expanse of the city. The sun is setting, casting a beautiful golden hue across the glass and steel towers. My life is balanced, my finances are untouchable, and my peace of mind is absolute. My family came to my house after my husband's funeral, demanding his life insurance money with threats, manipulation, and criminal schemes. They thought they could completely destroy me for a quick payday. But in their boundless greed and arrogance, they completely underestimated the mind of a structural engineer. They wanted to take my keys and strip away my foundation, but by morning, through the slow, unyielding will of legal and emotional justice, they lost absolutely everything. I am Amanda Vance, and I have built a life that will stand strong forever.